Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid were the last known voices from Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. And then, without warning, they vanished into silence. In the early hours of March 8, 2014, the two experienced pilots guided a Boeing 777 into the night sky on what should have been a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. But less than an hour after takeoff, the aircraft disappeared from radar, triggering one of the most baffling mysteries in aviation history. What followed was a decade of global searches, fragments of wreckage scattered across oceans, and whispers of conspiracy that refused to fade. Now, new revelations point not only to a hidden flight path, but to a chilling truth that may have been buried from the beginning.
March 8, 2014 began like any other day for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. The Boeing 777, a workhorse of modern aviation, was prepared for its routine journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The flight was scheduled to depart at 12:35 a.m., with 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board. Among them were tourists, business people, and a group of families traveling to China. The night was clear, and the skies were calm, with no indication that this flight would end in a mystery that would baffle the world for years to come. As the plane took off, it climbed into the night sky, cruising smoothly over the South China Sea. The air traffic controllers at Kuala Lumpur International Airport tracked the flight as it ascended, noting that the plane was on course, just as it had been for thousands of flights before. At 12:41 a.m., a routine communication was made between the cockpit and air traffic control. The plane was still within range of Malaysia's radar systems, and nothing out of the ordinary was reported. But within minutes, something changed. As MH370 neared the Malaysian coast, it made an unexpected left turn. The flight path deviated, and the plane turned back in the direction of the Malay Peninsula. This sudden shift in trajectory wasn't normal, yet it wasn't immediately alarming either. Air traffic controllers assumed it was a navigational error, or perhaps a routine maneuver. The deviation was brief, lasting only a few minutes before the aircraft resumed its flight path toward Beijing. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. At 1:19 a.m., Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 disappeared from radar screens. The plane was no longer visible to air traffic controllers. A routine flight had become something entirely different, an enigma, vanishing without a trace. It was only later, when satellite data was reviewed, that the world would learn that MH370 had continued flying for hours after losing contact, far off its original course, over a remote part of the Indian Ocean. But at that moment, no one knew that the plane had disappeared for good. It was the start of an investigation that would span the globe, uncover countless theories, and leave the world gripped by a question: what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370? As the minutes passed after the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the initial reaction was one of disbelief. The first signs of trouble were subtle, and the magnitude of the situation wasn't fully realized until it became clear that the plane was missing entirely. At 1:40 a.m., about 20 minutes after the aircraft had lost contact, Malaysia Airlines officially reported the plane as missing. By this time, air traffic controllers had begun to realize that something was wrong, but they had no answers. The immediate area where MH370 was last known to be was scoured, and the search began to grow rapidly as authorities scrambled to understand what had happened. In the first few hours, the focus was on the South China Sea, as that was the last known location of the plane. But as the hours turned into days, the search expanded. Search and rescue operations were launched by both the Malaysian military and other international bodies, including China and Vietnam. Every available aircraft was put into the air, and ships were dispatched to comb the waters. The Malaysian government, desperate to find the plane and bring answers to the families, was frantically coordinating the efforts. But the task was monumental. The area to search was vast, more than 60,000 square kilometers of ocean, and the mystery surrounding the flight was only deepening with every passing moment. Meanwhile, the world watched in horror as news outlets began broadcasting the developing crisis. Families of the passengers were still waiting for information, clinging to hope that somehow, somewhere, the plane would be found. But as the search expanded into the Indian Ocean, new information began to emerge that made the situation even more puzzling. Satellite data, which had initially gone unnoticed, revealed a chilling fact. MH370 had not gone down in the South China Sea as initially thought. Instead, it had turned around, changed its course, and flown for hours after losing contact with air traffic control. The plane's last known position was near the edge of Malaysian radar coverage. This new development turned the search in a completely different direction, toward the southern Indian Ocean, an area that was incredibly remote and difficult to access. The sudden shift of the plane's path raised many questions, with no immediate answers. The investigation was just beginning, and no one knew yet how deep the mystery would go. As the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 continued to expand, investigators began to piece together fragments of data that would lead to a crucial breakthrough. The most significant of these pieces came from satellite communications. Early on, it was assumed that the plane had simply lost contact and crashed into the South China Sea, but this theory was soon shattered by a shocking discovery. The aircraft's satellite communication system, which remained active even after radar contact was lost, had been exchanging signals with a satellite network operated by Inmarsat, a British telecommunications company. Inmarsat's system had been receiving automatic handshakes from the plane at regular intervals, though the aircraft's location remained unclear. The last known position was still the location where the plane disappeared from radar, but these handshakes continued, revealing that the plane had not simply gone down. The last ping from the aircraft came more than 7 hours after the last communication with air traffic control, indicating that the plane had continued to fly for an extended period of time. By analyzing these handshakes, Inmarsat and Aviation, experts were able to narrow the plane's final route into a broad arc known as the Seventh Arc. This arc spanned a vast section of the southern Indian Ocean, an area that was among the most remote and inaccessible parts of the world. The data indicated that the plane had traveled along this arc before it seemingly disappeared, leaving no visible wreckage in its wake. However, the satellite data was far from definitive. The information provided only a rough estimate of the plane's location, and with the vastness of the search area, it was still nearly impossible to know where to focus the efforts. The satellite ping data had created a new lead, but it raised even more unsettling questions. Why had the plane turned so drastically off course? Had the plane been deliberately diverted, or was this the result of some catastrophic mechanical failure? The uncertainty grew as search teams scoured the Indian Ocean, but no wreckage was found, deepening the mystery. It would take years before any debris was recovered, and the ocean, vast and unforgiving, seemed to swallow every lead. The trail had gone cold, but the satellite data was now the only thread linking the world to the fate of MH370. As months passed with no sign of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the search grew into one of the most complex and expensive operations in aviation history. In the early stages, the focus had been on the South China Sea, where it was originally thought the plane had crashed. However, as investigators continued to analyze the satellite data, they realized the plane had veered far off course, and the search shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, a remote and largely unexplored region. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, working in conjunction with international experts, took the lead on the search, using sophisticated sonar technology and underwater drones to comb the ocean floor. Despite the advanced technology, the search area was immense, over 120,000 square kilometers of open water, and the conditions were grueling. The Indian Ocean, known for its deep waters and violent currents, made it incredibly difficult to locate wreckage. The planes and ships scouring the surface found nothing but endless waves. Submersible robots were sent down to the ocean floor, but they too found little evidence. The lack of visible wreckage was a huge challenge. The debris that had been found along the coasts of Africa, including a flaperon in Réunion Island, was a glimmer of hope, but it only raised more questions. The piece of the wing, confirmed to be from MH370, was found thousands of miles from where the plane was believed to have gone down. How could a piece of wreckage wash up so far from the search area? It seemed impossible. As the months turned into years, the search slowed, and many began to lose faith that the plane would ever be found. The Australian government, having poured millions of dollars into the search, eventually announced that the operation would be suspended in January 2017. No one knew if the plane had simply sunk into the ocean, its final resting place impossible to locate, or if it had gone further afield, hidden somewhere within the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. The international effort continued, but the fact that no significant wreckage had been found cast a shadow of doubt over the whole investigation. For the families waiting for answers, the silence was deafening, and the case seemed to be slipping into the realm of unsolved mysteries. As the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 came to an official halt in early 2017, the world was left with more questions than answers. With no solid evidence to explain the plane's disappearance, a flood of theories began to fill the void. These theories ranged from plausible to outrageous, but the sheer complexity of the case made it difficult for investigators to rule anything out. One of the most widely discussed possibilities was a catastrophic mechanical failure. If a critical system had failed mid-flight, it might explain why the plane veered off course without issuing a distress signal. Some speculated that a sudden loss of cabin pressure or a fire could have incapacitated the crew and passengers, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot until it eventually ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. But this theory failed to account for the aircraft's long flight path and the lack of any distress calls before the plane lost contact. Another theory that gained traction was the idea of hijacking, the possibility that someone on board took control of the aircraft, either through a deliberate act or a hidden motive, became a topic of intense speculation. Some pointed to the plane's captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, whose personal life and possible psychological state were scrutinized. Could he have been responsible for the plane's diversion? There were rumors of his personal troubles and alleged political views that might have influenced his decision, but no concrete evidence ever emerged to support this theory. Others focused on the possibility of a terrorist attack. With global security at an all-time high, the idea that terrorists had somehow taken control of MH370 felt like a reasonable, though terrifying, explanation. Yet the absence of any claims of responsibility or demands for ransom made this theory seem increasingly unlikely. As months turned into years, a third possibility emerged, that MH370 had been the victim of a covert military operation. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the plane was shot down or intercepted by a military force. This theory was fueled by the fact that the plane had disappeared in an area with limited surveillance and few civilian air traffic routes. Still, this theory remained speculative, and no nation ever admitted to being involved. With no evidence to support any single theory, the investigation seemed to spiral further into uncertainty, leaving both the public and the families of those aboard MH370 to wonder if the truth would ever be uncovered. By 2017, the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 had officially been suspended, and the world seemed to settle into a grim acceptance that the plane would never be found. Despite the unprecedented efforts of international search teams led by Australia, the operation had failed to locate the plane. After combing through more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean, the experts were at a loss. The Indian Ocean, vast and unpredictable, had swallowed any trace of the plane, and the wreckage that had been found was minimal at best. The flaperon discovered on Réunion Island, though a major clue, had only raised more questions. How could one small piece of wreckage end up so far from the known search areas? Was it possible that the plane had crashed in a different location than initially thought? For the families of the passengers, the uncertainty was unbearable. The official search had come to an end, but the pain of not knowing what happened to their loved ones remained a daily torment. They were left with nothing but endless theories and the hope that somehow, some new piece of information would emerge to answer the one question that everyone was desperate to solve. What happened to MH370? In the midst of this heartache, many family members were still calling for continued investigation. They pushed for the search to continue, demanding that no stone be left unturned in the quest for the truth. Meanwhile, the aviation world was also grappling with the implications of the disappearance. MH370 had exposed vulnerabilities in aviation, safety that many had never considered. The fact that a plane could disappear without a trace in the modern age, in a region where radar coverage was sparse, raised serious concerns about air traffic monitoring systems and global aviation protocols? Were there gaps in the way air traffic was tracked? Could something similar happen again? These questions haunted the investigation as much as the mystery of the plane's disappearance itself. In 2018, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, having access to new technology and more data, announced plans to resume the search. They would focus on a new area, closer to the seventh arc, the estimated flight path derived from the satellite data. It was a last-ditch effort, a final attempt to uncover the truth. But the search was now tempered with doubt, as the longer the plane remained elusive, the harder it seemed to believe that answers would ever be found. The ocean, as vast and deep as the mystery, seemed to hold all the answers in its depths, but whether they would ever be revealed was uncertain. As the years passed and the official search efforts slowed, the mystery surrounding the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 only seemed to deepen. In 2020, a new revelation surfaced that reignited global interest in the case. A piece of debris that had washed up on the shores of Mozambique, first found in 2016, was re-examined by a team of independent experts. This piece, another flaperon, was confirmed to be from MH370. However, the discovery of this new debris only complicated the situation further. The wreckage was found thousands of miles away from the previous search zones, in an area that hadn't been thoroughly investigated. How could a piece of the plane have drifted so far? The more investigators delved into the data, the more it seemed that the official search had missed vital clues. At the same time, new questions emerged regarding the methods used in the search itself. Some experts began to wonder whether the initial search area, based on the limited satellite data, was too broad, potentially missing key clues in smaller regions. Others argued that the plane could have been located much earlier if more resources had been allocated to the task, particularly in areas closer to the coastline or the more rugged parts of the southern Indian Ocean. The lack of a concrete theory only fueled skepticism and frustration. Had vital evidence been overlooked? Was the plane's final location still being missed despite all the technology and expertise deployed? This sense of ongoing uncertainty began to breed a renewed wave of conspiracy theories. The disappearance of MH370, it seemed, had become more than just a tragic aviation accident. It had morphed into a global puzzle, one filled with what-ifs and endless speculations. Some theorists suggested that the plane's disappearance could have been orchestrated by powerful entities, with evidence deliberately hidden or suppressed. Others speculated about the plane's fate being tied to geopolitical tensions in the region. Was it possible that nations involved in the search had been withholding information for reasons of national security? With so many unanswered questions, many felt that the truth was being obscured, intentionally or not. Meanwhile, the families of those on board MH370, still desperate for closure, struggled to make sense of it all. The ongoing search and the new revelations provided them with tiny glimmers of hope, but the overwhelming feeling was one of helplessness. Would the truth ever emerge? Or would the disappearance of MH370 remain one of the greatest mysteries of modern aviation, forever lost to the depths of the Indian Ocean? As the years went on, and the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 officially ended, the case gradually transformed into something much larger than just an aviation disaster. It became a subject of intense speculation, conspiracy theories, and endless debates. With so many aspects of the disappearance remaining unclear, a growing number of people began to question whether the official narrative was the full truth. Theories started to emerge, suggesting that the incident could be part of a much larger and darker cover-up. One of the most pervasive conspiracy theories centered on the idea that MH370 was not lost due to mechanical failure, hijacking, or an accident, but rather that the plane's disappearance was orchestrated by a powerful force. Some speculated that the plane had been deliberately taken off course to hide something, perhaps related to sensitive technology, classified information, or even military interests. The theory gained traction due to the fact that the plane's final known location was in an area of the world with few surveillance systems, and the fact that the plane seemingly disappeared without a trace seemed almost too convenient for some. Among these theories was the suggestion that the flight's captain, Zaharieh Ahmad Shah, could have played a pivotal role in deliberately diverting the aircraft. Investigators had previously looked into his personal life, which included interests in political matters, and questioned whether he might have had a reason to carry out such an act. But no concrete evidence was found linking the captain to a purposeful act of sabotage, leaving many to wonder if there were other factors at play. Another theory involved the possibility of a hijacking, but this too was shrouded in uncertainty. No ransom demands or terrorist claims ever surfaced, making it hard to believe that this was a traditional hijacking. Still, the lack of communication or distress signals from the cockpit left room for the theory to persist, with some claiming that the plane's disappearance was part of a larger international conspiracy. The more these theories grew, the more the official investigation seemed to fray. Questions about the role of governments, airlines, and international agencies in the investigation began to surface. Could some countries have known more than they let on? Were there details about the plane's fate deliberately kept from the public eye? The possibility of a cover-up, intentional or not, gained a strong following. The truth behind MH370 to many was something that had been hidden from the public, lost in a maze of bureaucracy, secrecy, and possibly even international politics. For the families of the passengers, only deepened. With no clear answers coming from authorities, and so many conflicting theories emerging, they were left to grapple with the possibility that the full story of what happened to MH370 might never be told. What began as a devastating tragedy had become a global puzzle, one that continued to haunt both the families of the lost and the public at large, with no clear resolution in sight. In 2024, a decade after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished, a surprising new development breathed life into the cold case. A group of independent researchers, using updated satellite technology and artificial intelligence, uncovered an anomaly in the original data that had been previously overlooked. By reprocessing the satellite pings with advanced machine learning models, they discovered a slight but consistent variation in the aircraft's descent pattern that suggested a more controlled flight path than previously believed. It appeared the plane didn't spiral into the ocean as had long been assumed, but instead followed a deliberate trajectory until its final moments. This revelation reignited intense interest in the case. Aviation experts, journalists, and investigators returned to the data with fresh eyes. The implication was chilling. Someone may have been in control of the aircraft until the very end. This new interpretation contradicted earlier theories of a sudden mechanical failure or a ghost flight piloted by an unresponsive autopilot system. The pattern of descent was smooth and purposeful, not chaotic or abrupt. It suggested awareness, intention, and control. Attention quickly turned once again to the cockpit. Could one of the pilots have carefully guided the aircraft to a remote part of the ocean before plunging it into the sea? If so, why? And how could such an action be executed so flawlessly without raising alarms during the flight? These new questions revived old suspicions, but also brought new perspectives. Some experts proposed that the flight may have been commandeered remotely or by someone with exceptional technical knowledge. Theories involving cyber-sabotage or the manipulation of the aircraft's communication systems were suddenly back in the spotlight. The discovery also prompted criticism of earlier search efforts. Investigators questioned whether key clues had been missed due to limited technology at the time. Had the world been searching the wrong part of the ocean all along? Families of the passengers renewed their calls for a new targeted search, now armed with refined data and improved tools. Governments that had once stepped back from the case were pressured to re-engage. This breakthrough didn't solve the mystery, but it cracked open the case once more. It hinted at a deeper, more deliberate narrative beneath the surface of the tragedy. And for the first time in years, it felt like the truth about what happened to MH370 might finally be within